Okay, so tonight's agenda. I'm gonna do a short intro of ReImagine Turtle Creek and our different working groups. Then I'll hand time over to Gerry Maynard, who is with us, and he's gonna be talking about backyard composting. We'll have time for breakout groups of all of our working groups, which everyone is invited to attend. And then we'll do a report back and wrap up by 8 o'clock. So what is ReImagine Turtle Creek? ReImagine Turtle Creek is a community-led sustainable development initiative to implement sustainable economic development. Meetings began in December 2019 with community visioning sessions to explore options for actions and projects based on what people of this area wanted to see done. So fast forward to now, constant communication through the TICWAC, which is the Turtle Creek Watershed and Airshed, and actively engaged working groups have united to create a working model of community projects to progress our present short future. There's 5 working groups that were established to identify the 5 distinct passions of our community. Through capitalizing on local ingenuity, innovation, and motivation, we seek to implement sustainable projects in this region. And just a reminder, this region is, the Airshed is most of southwestern Pennsylvania, but the Watershed is this area right here, which is most of the suburbs east of Pittsburgh. So it goes from about like Wilkinsburg, North Braddock to like Greensburg. Plum is up to the north, and then Irwin is down to the south. Our working groups. So we have 5 different working groups. I'm gonna just run through all of them and what their main projects are. Health and wellness focuses on optimizing the health and wellness of individuals, families, and communities. And they're about sharing information through podcast formats that focuses on individuals' journeys to sustainable health and wellness. And it's an interview format. So the landscaping and land management group talks about neighborhood greening, beautification, and permaculture, and they focus mostly on sustainable landscaping practices and adding pollinator gardens to otherwise unbeneficial landscapes like lawns. The Buildings, Renewables, and Infrastructure group focuses to implement sustainable and renewable methods to existing buildings and structures in the area. It also aims to educate the public on the importance of such practices. Our main project is reimagining the Monroeville Mall into a sustainable hub for Monroeville, which includes like adding green infrastructure, solar panels, and we had like a economic impact analysis for this project that shows that it will bring a lot of jobs and economic stimulation to the area of Monroeville and surrounding communities. And right now we're in the outreach and development phase of this project. ReImagine Food Systems is a backyard gardening program dedicated to increasing community access to healthy, fresh food. We're in year 2, and right now this group is working on program planning for giving low-income individuals garden beds so they have access to food. And then the last group is single-use plastics, single-use plastics diversion, excuse me, which TICWAC established recognizing that single-use plastics are a huge problem in the area. And they've been talking about recently hosting a business incubator for plastic-free local businesses. So, backyard composting. Gerry Maynard is a 47-year resident of Monroeville and a retired engineer. He's been gardening in some manner most of his adult life and has been a master gardener with the Penn State Extension since 2015. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then Gerry can share his and start his presentation.
Thank you, Annie. And thank you for inviting me to share our presentation developed by Penn State Extension. Let me get this on screen here.
Hi, Gerry.
Hello.
Stan's here too.
Hi.
We're excited.
All right. It's okay. I've got a Hmm.
Are you looking at this, Annie?
Do you see what I'm seeing?
It just says screen broadcast Zoom,
Yeah, I don't
but
know.
it's just spinning like it's not doing anything. It has a little red light.
We
Okay,
can
now,
still see your
now
screen.
you are sharing screen, so
You should be able to
Okay.
find your presentation now because we can see your screen clearly.
There it is. Now it is. How about that?
There you go.
Do you see that okay?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Now, let's see. Let's get started here. Composting. It's a pretty mundane subject, isn't it? I'm always amazed at the interest in such a mundane topic. But here we are, composting. We're going to try to explain what it's all about. And if you think about it, any organic material will decompose given enough time and the right circumstances. But we're really going to talk about the things that we accumulate in our homes, in our yards, grass clippings, food scraps, leaves in the fall, that sort of thing. And what we're really trying to do with composting is speeding up that natural decay process so that we get the benefits of this material as quickly as we can. So what it does is you really want to control those 4 factors that you see there so that we can manage the pile so that it happens relatively quickly and we get a very important product from it. Why do we want to compost? Well, this is a generic photo of a landfill. And, we really shouldn't be putting organic material that can be composted there. It ought to be reserved for things that cannot be recycled or composted. Here's a map of Monroeville, and they're just to the left of the word Pitcairn. There's a spot. And theirs is a little closer. That is the Monroeville landfill. And look at the size of that. It's bigger than all of Pitcairn. And it takes up a good chunk of Monroeville. And, when you're on Broadway Boulevard and Triborough Expressway, you see a lot of trucks coming in from Pittsburgh. It's not just Monroeville's trash that's put in there. So it's just, we really need to minimize what we put in the landfill, recycle what we can. Obviously, cardboard, plastic bottles, and cans. I don't know if you're aware, but any metals that I have other than cans, I recycle at the construction junction in Wilkinsburg, and just keep it in a bucket and take it out there periodically and dump it. It gets recycled, sent to one of the local, probably Edgar Thompson, and is recycled. What do you need to make compost? Well, these microbes, they're the little critters that do the major work. You need some food and air and water. Pretty simple, really. This kind of gives you an idea of what these microbes and insects are that do the work. There on the bottom left, you see the organic residues. You can see an eggshell there, something else, leaves, grass, I guess. And we're going to get into, all these microbes and how they work and what phases they work in. They attack the food that's put in the compost pile. Where do these little critters come from. You know, they're present in all of the elements that you put into the compost pile. But really, a good major portion of them come from the soil beneath it. They're there. They're just waiting to be put to work. And one of the things that if you're going to build a compost pile, you really don't want to put it on a concrete slab or an asphalt slab because it doesn't have access to the soil. I'm sure some of these microbes are present on these surfaces, but not to the extent that they are in your garden soil. It's kind of hard to believe 800 feet of fungal threads in a teaspoon of soil, but I think somebody at Penn State must have somehow done that research and came to this conclusion. But it's unbelievable, really. When you put in a compost, anything like I mentioned before, all organic material will compost, but you really need to be careful of what you put in there. So you can see here 4 main sources that are usually put into a compost pile. I see sawdust down there. Sawdust, you want to use it sparingly, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Things to avoid: no animal products. Eggshells, I put in my eggshells, and I'll be honest, I don't wash them. I just put them in there, and that doesn't seem to be a problem. Hard to kill weeds. You don't want to put the weeds in there because you're just going to be, you may not, the seeds may not be sterilized when you're done, the compost is done, and they will just spread them in your garden. So that's not a good idea. Dog and cat waste, they are compostable, but that's a whole different process and not something we're going to discuss this evening. And of course, anything with lots of insects or diseases, you find another place for those. Don't put them in your compost pile. And I think specifically of tent worms. If you have an infestation of tent worms, you usually prune it out, put it in a bag, and put it in the trash pickup. It's nothing that you want to encourage to spread in your garden. Lime, it does increase the pH, and so you may have some odor problems if you were to put that in. And also wood ash. Use that sparingly. It's just it has the same effect as lime, and I do not put any wood ash in my compost. I don't see the need for it. And shredding. Yes, it's a good idea to shred, particularly the woody parts, and it just makes the surface area more readily available to those bacteria and fungi that will do the work of the decomposting. So it does speed up the process quite a bit. Okay, really, when you want to speed up the process, you're striving for a mix of carbon-rich and nitrogen-rich wastes that you put in there. We call them browns and greens. Yes, carbon-rich organic wastes will decompose over time, albeit very, very, very slowly. By adding nitrogen to the mix, you do speed up that process. Browns, what constitutes browns? Well, brown leaves that fallen in the fall, you can see that. Straw, paper, sawdust, anything like that. The numbers that you see here represent the carbon to nitrogen ratio of leaves. You can see that there's very little nitrogen for all the carbon that's in there. And each one of those. What are the greens? Well, you can see right here. And you're going to say to yourself, coffee grounds, they're brown, aren't they? Well, yeah, this is a trick question. It's really a green. It's got a very, very heavy in nitrogen. You see there's manure there. So this presentation is those who are maybe in homesteads and areas like that. Maybe not so much applicable to us. Here you can see the pros and how they decompose. Like I said, the browns will decompose, albeit slowly. Greens much more quickly. I think we've all had the experience of having a pile of grass that we've cut and dumped and come back a few days later and it's kind of icky. Well, that's because it decomposes very quickly and it mats and there's poor aeration and you end up with ammonia, the smell of ammonia. Now over on the left, you see that browns tie up nitrogen in the soil if not fully composted. That's where it comes. I come to the issue of sawdust or wood chips that you put in your compost pile. They will bind up the nitrogen and that's the first component that's used in the composting process. Now we can have anaerobic composting or aerobic. Aerobic means that the oxygen is present, and if it's properly aerated, it will not produce any foul odors. I have 13 compost bins in my yard, and odor is simply not the problem. Now this is where it gets a little bit technical here. The temperature range anywhere from 55 to about 155, 160 degrees. That's when the composting, active composting takes place in that temperature range. It says here that a thermometer is a nice tool, but not essential. They're really not very expensive, but it does help you to keep a close eye on what's happening in your compost pile. Because you may not be aware that it's not composting where it should be, and but it does give you a method of monitoring the situation. Okay, here is we're going to talk about some little more technical parts of it. On the across the bottom, you see A, B, C, D. This is the phase that we're in. A is mesophilic. The mesophiles are the bacteria, the microorganisms that act to decompose up to about 100 degrees. And just so happens that our body temperature is in that range. And so where we have something in common with a compost pile, the bacteria that keeps our gut healthy they are mesophiles. And so it's all part of the decomposition process. Then it goes into the thermophilic phase, B, where the temperatures in the pile shoot up, and over this graph, it shows it about 160 degrees, and that's when you really know your pile is cooking. And it comes back down into a mesophilic range again, and ultimately goes into a curing phase where it matures. And really what that means is your compost at that point is not quite ready to be put in the garden because it's not quite completely decomposed. When it has completely decomposed, it's no longer needing the nitrogen. So if you were to take your compost before it's cured and put it in your garden along with your plants, the nitrogen in the soil would be bound by the compost, and less of it would be available to the plant. So it's very important to cure the compost before you actually put it into use. Talking about a carbon nitrogen ratio here, if it's too carbon rich, so 60-1, it's not going to get very hot. It's going to take longer to decompose. And now the ratio is 30-1. This is maybe a little confusing. We're not talking about volume or weight. What we're talking about is the carbon content of the browns and the nitrogen content of the greens. And you saw in a previous slide that the browns have various concentrations of carbon, and so do the greens have various concentration of the nitrogen. I don't find it as necessary to be this precise when you're building a compost pile, but just keep in mind that you need a balance of the two. And if you can shoot for a 30-1 ratio, you probably have an ideal compost pile. If it doesn't get hot, it'll decompose, it'll compost, but it's going to take longer. Reasons for not getting hot: maybe it's compacted, not enough air is getting in there, too much water. And you really do have to kind of monitor this to make sure that the conditions are right. High pile temperature, most rapid composting, and it presents the opportunity to kill pathogens and to sterilize weed seeds. Need to get air into the compost pile. This is pretty self-explanatory. Air comes in at the bottom, the sides, and rises up through, and it provides that that element of the four that are needed to have a good compost pile. Now let's move on here. Aeration. Really, when we're talking about a compost pile, the best one is one that's kind of fluffy and not compacted. So we really need to find a way to get air in there. And here in this, I think there's a perforated pipe, there's just a pipe, and then there's some branches that are stuck in there. All of these break up the compaction that's going to happen. And when you build a pile, gravity is going to act on it. It's going to compress all by itself. I noticed that in the fall, when I build my collect leaves from my neighbors to build my compost piles, I go back out and 2 or 3 days later, and the pile has fallen about a foot. It doesn't. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't decompose that fast. That is compaction. That's the effect of gravity. It's just everything is just settling in there. Turning the pile is probably the very best thing you can do. That fluffs up the material, and it allows you to get air in there, and it's probably the best way of doing it. On the right, you can see these little toggle tools that I've tried those, and they're okay, but there's nothing like a pitchfork and get in there and turn it all over. We mentioned that we need water. Water content should be about 40 to 60%, and that's by weight, not in volume. Good rule of thumb is, as wet as a squeezed out sponge. If it's too brown, if it's too wet, obviously if it's too dry, you add water, but if it's too wet, you can add browns or turn a pile. And when you turn a pile, what you're doing is you're exposing it to air and help to dry it out. It won't dry out if it's compacted. Like I said, you're looking for an optimum mix of browns and greens. You need to turn it to aerate it. And then you need to allow it to, when it's done, allow it to mature for at least 4 weeks. You can see here, this is your typical compost bin arrangement that most of us think of. You got on the left, you've got the fresh materials that are put in there, lots of browns, and I'm sure there's lots of greens in there too, but volume wise, it will be more browns. Then after a few weeks, you use a pitchfork, put it all in the middle bin, and then ultimately put them in the right bin, and it sits there until the decomposition has completed. There's the rules of thumb here. Turn a pile once a week. It says here in the first few weeks, temperature should reach about 140. Maybe I'm just doing something right, but when I put my piles together, it's usually 2 or 3 days, and it's up to 150, 160 degrees. I don't know, maybe I'm just lucky and I got the right composition and the right conditions, but hey, it works. Now, we mentioned that the mesophiles act in the lower temperature ranges. And one of the questions that often comes up says, well, what happens in the wintertime? Decomposition continues. There's just another category of bacteria that are at work. And as you can imagine, it's very, very slow. But yes, the composting and the decomposition continues to work during cold temperatures. But when the temperatures heat up, when the weather gets better, the mesophiles get back to work. They do their thing, and the temperature in the compost pile gets back up because you've watered it, you've aerated it, you've stirred it up, and you've introduced the right conditions for the temperature to go back up. It'll go back up. If it gets too hot, it's really nothing to worry about, because it will self-regulate and come back down to the right temperature. When is it done? Here's the conditions. Loose, crumbly. The pile will have shrunk a lot. And you should not recognize anything that any of the material that you started out with. That's an ideal situation. Obviously, not everything in the compost pile will decompose completely at the same time. Little pieces of wood, sticks, things like that will still take longer to decompose. I sift my compost pile, the compost when I'm done, and I use a screen with a half-inch screen. And obviously, some of the non-composted material comes through, but for the most part, it is finished compost, which I then store for an additional period of time to let the composting process run its course. How do you know when it's done? These are some tests. And if you put some in a bag and it shouldn't smell after a few days. You can also try germinating some seeds in it. And they germinate. You've got some good compost. Where do you put it? You can put it anywhere, except, like I said, on concrete or asphalt or any floor or anything like that, where it won't have access to the microorganisms in the soil below it. It's nice to have water available. I run a hose out to my area where I have my compost piles, and it's just a matter of if I think I need water, I can just turn the hose on. So you don't have to be that. You don't have to necessarily have to go to all that trouble. Where do you put it? Obviously, someplace where it's not going to, not going to be in a little gully or someplace that retains water after rain. Someplace near where you're going to use it. And I think the fourth bullet here is be a good neighbor. Keep it attractive and keep it out of your neighbor's view. I wouldn't want my neighbor sitting on his back porch having to stare at my compost piles. So I put them on the back of my property, and I'm fortunate that I live up against woods. So it's really not in anybody's line of. Here you see some various ways of building a compost pile. The ideal size is about 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. Anything bigger, I've tried it bigger. I've tried 4 by 4 by 4, and that was it didn't work very well. You can see you can have wood, you can have concrete blocks. I personally use the roll fencing. You can use manufactured bins. I have used these. I wasn't very impressed with them, but you may, depending on the volume of compost you have. I tend to have a lot. I probably produce 1 to 2 cubic yards of compost each year, and this was just too small. And but depending on the size of your yard, your needs, these could be something that you could use. And of course, they're a lot more attractive than, my roll fencing. But so if something, you're going to have something in a place that's going to be visible, then you might consider something like this. Oops, I'm sorry. Some problems, troubleshooting, odors. Like I said, I've not had any odor problems. It usually if you do have some, it's become anaerobic. So you got to introduce air back into the pile. Or if that's not the case, then you just need more brown, something that will dry it out. If it's you smell ammonia, it's just like that pile of grass that's accumulated and compacted. It's going to smell like ammonia. It's too much nitrogen. Add some carbon. Turn it. Low pile temperature. Like I said, it will continue to decompose, but it's going to take longer. So things that can cause that, obviously in the wintertime, it's going to slow down. It may be too dry. It may not have enough air. It may not have enough nitrogen. Correct those issues and you should be back in business. High temperature, the pile is too large. There are area or people who live off the grid, and they're known to be able to produce hot water just from a compost pile. And but you really need a very, very, very big pile. And so it's one thing that we don't think about too much, but you can use it for heating water and getting a nice hot shower when you're out there with no other utilities around. Okay, the top guy, I get him. He comes around. He's a good friend of mine. The other two, I've only seen the opossum once here in my time here. And since we've lived in the current house, we have not seen any skunks, but obviously things that attract them are, meat, fatty food, things like that. We don't put those in. You see worm composting down there at the bottom for food scraps, vermicomposting. That is a whole different method of composting. Works best for food scraps, small quantities, and it's beyond the scope of what we're really going to discuss here tonight. Why do you want to use compost? It really improves your soil. We all know that if you got earthworms in your soil, that's good, healthy soil. And good means the microorganisms are there. It can hold water, and it increases the retention of the nutrients in the soil so that they're more readily available to the plants. It improves the friability, improves drainage, loosens clay, and it can suppress some plant pathogens. It's important to understand that the compost is not a fertilizer, but it does contain some nutrients. It's more of a soil amendment that, like in the previous slide, is the previous slide is talked about helps retain water and moisture in the soil, all things that are necessary for good plant growth. How to use it. Be sure it's mature. Really don't, you want the soil nitrogen that's in your soil to be available for your plants, not for the continued decomposition of the compost. So this slide kind of reiterates some of the things in the first few slides. Mulching. I think we all know what the benefits of mulching are. I think a lot of people don't understand how you can make things worse with mulch. Really, it ought to be just a thin blanket over the soil, and not much more than 3 inches. And it says here 3 to 4 inches from the trunk of a tree. Many, many times I see mulch, not just compost, but mulch piled up against the trunk of a tree. The whole pile is in like a cone shape. That's really not good. That allows insects access to the bark beyond the natural demarcation of the soil level, and it can introduce some diseases and insects into and under the bark that could be very detrimental. So it really should not be piled up. It should be 3 inches deep and well away from the actual trunk of the tree. As an aside, I've seen homes where there's a bed along the foundation and they've mulched it to the point where the mulch went higher than the foundation and it's up against the siding of the house. Not good. That's a good way to introduce insects into the framing of your house. So be sure, if you see any of that, be sure that the mulch there's a gap between the surface of the mulch, the top of the mulch, and the lowest part of your siding. Top dressing for a lawn, if you do that, you can use it on compost mix. These are some of my piles. As I said, I use the wire fencing. 3-foot high fencing comes in 50-foot rolls. A 10-foot section will result in a 3-foot diameter compost bin. The pipes you see are my way of introducing air into the pile. I think it works, but it's not as good as turning the pile. And if you use a wire fencing, you can just zip tie the ends together. I use a metal rod that I can interlock the 2 ends of the fencing together. And what I like about this is I'm not wasting zip ties. And when I go to turn the pile, I pull that rod out, open up the fencing, and I have direct access to the entire pile for turning it. Here you can see it. This is the other side. And you can see I have this is all PVC pipe that I've drilled holes in. There's a square in the bottom, also perforated with the risers coming up. Air can circulate through the pile, and I think it works pretty well. You can see my garden there. I have 12 3-foot by 8-foot raised beds, and we do square foot gardening. I don't know if anyone else does. Here's some of my finished compost. This, there's two different colors there because one is light and one's wet, and the little areas are not so wet. So this is after it's been sifted. Yes, there's still some pieces in there that are not completely decomposted, but it's as fine as I can get it sifting. That's it. Questions?
I would have a question, but I was waiting for other people.
Yep.
The ideal gardening total mass shouldn't all be compost. Obviously, you should mix a certain percentage of the compost that your completed compost with a
Yeah.
certain amount of topsoil. Is there a ratio?
Let me get this fixed here. Okay. There I am. Okay. Yes, there is a ratio. If you want to go soilless gardening, which is what I do in the raised beds and the square foot gardening, you use 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 mature compost, and 1/3 vermiculite. And that gives you, it's almost like the same stuff that you buy bagged at Lowe's. And
What is
the
it? I'm sorry.
the vermiculite helps with moisture retention, and the peat moss. Peat moss is decomposes very, very, very slowly. It's not something that you would put into your compost pile per se, but it's the other component that helps to loosen your garden soil.
The vermiculite, it always looks like there are little styrofoam balls in there. What is
Yeah.
That's vermiculite.
That's the vermiculite?
The vermiculite is a mineral that's mined.
Okay.
If you thinking of little white balls, that's perlite.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the little white balls are perlite, and vermiculite is kind of a grayish. I don't know. Kind of reminds me of mica, but
It is mica. It is expanded
Is it?
mica. That is vermiculite.
Yeah.
Perlite, I think, is some kind of volcanic rock.
I think so.
And vermiculite is better at, they both help aerate soil, and vermiculite, perlite is more on the aeration side. Vermiculite also holds water a little better.
Yes.
Vermiculite is a little harder to come by now these days because it does make a dust which gives you like silicosis or something.
Oh, nice.
So I use it. I mean, many of you know I garden on my roof, and I do use it, but I'm sort of careful about holding my breath when it's blowing around, or trying to have it be moistened as soon as possible so it blows around less, because I am aware that it is hazardous. And so I get it from a professional, from a commercial supplier, but I don't even know if consumers can buy it anymore these days. Perlite is the little white specks you see.
I
on the
buy
pile.
all those materials, the perlite and the vermiculite at Better Feeds in
Mhm.
Turtle Creek.
Yeah, Better Feeds, B&G Supply, that sort of thing. But yeah, just be careful breathing around it.
Yep.
I think it may used to, I have seen bags of it labeled asbestos free, which tells me that sometimes there might be asbestos in it. So I just try to avoid breathing it. I try to dampen it down when I'm mixing it in, because I can add the,
Well, I think, we're all wearing masks nowadays, so it's wear your mask because your exposure to it dry is for a very short period of time. Just that when you're mixing it in with your soil, but once it's in the ground and watered,
Mhm.
that kind of suppresses, I would think, any airborne elements that could be unhealthy.
yeah, on this roof garden, I'm basically making the soil out of whole cloth. And what I use is AgriCycle and in larger quantities. I make beautiful compost and I use it to enrich planting holes when I'm planting things and pots and stuff. But I don't make it in the kind of quantities I need to populate all my big beds. So my soil is AgriCycle compost, some AgriCycle soil compost mix, perlite and vermiculite, some sand if I have it handy. And those are the bulk constituents of my soil. And people are always welcome to visit and check it out.
Yep.
And as you may have seen in the compost, in the comments, I'm also a lifelong composter with lots of lore and composting chops.
I had another question about the, how to check on, not temperature, but basically pH of the soil. I've been doing things that have not been scientifically mixed because I can't see in this black barrel, it's a double barrel system that I slide open and put my table scraps in there, and I try to make the mix so that you have brown green. And I suspect I have too much carbon because it takes forever, and then of course you've got winter. But anyway, there's only so much the barrel will hold. And so this other system looks to me to be maybe the better way to go. It's just a matter of building it and making it aesthetically okay. But then what about the pH of that? Is there any pH testing like before or after you're mixing it to the soil? Because I've been looking through these little magazines, and for $35, I could get a pH meter. I could also send my stuff to Penn State to test.
Yeah, right.
What's the quickest way? Wouldn't it be the meter?
I've never thought about the pH in my compost. I'm more interested in the pH of the soil that I'm planting.
Yeah.
So if that ends up in the right range, I'm okay. I used to test it years ago. I do have a pH meter, but honestly, I haven't used it in quite a few years because I haven't had a need to get to worry about it. I guess I haven't. My plants have been. We have lots and lots of plants, and of course, I know that you don't plant certain things around evergreens because they're high or low pH, things like that.
Yeah.
There was one thing I wanted to mention that I don't know if many of you are aware of it. We talked about sawdust, putting sawdust in. Anything from black walnut, don't. No leaves, no twigs, no branches, keep them out.
No walnuts.
No walnuts. Walnut trees contain a chemical called juglone, and the juglone is a chemical that will suppress the growth of other plants. That phenomenon is called allelopathy, and where the chemicals generated by one plant, the black walnut, will inhibit the growth of other plants, particularly in its root zone. I think back to many years ago when I was starting out and I had some asparagus. I put in 25 crowns of asparagus and only one in the middle came up because it was between two walnut trees.
Oh, no.
And that one was the one that was out of the root zone. So I've never tried asparagus since then.
Yeah, I think the mechanism of that is that the juglone harms the microbes, which are so important to plant nutrient uptake. There's a whole symbiosis going on around the roots,
Yep.
where the plants are photosynthesizing and making sugar, and they give that sugar through the roots to the fungi, and the fungi spread out with their little mycelial network and bring mineral nutrients to the plants. So that's one reason why compost is so important. For you feed the soil, you're feeding the microbes, and they are feeding your plants.
Hi. I have a couple of questions. One is, like, say, what if you live in a place where there's really no place that you could realistically put a compost pile? Or even if you live in an apartment, like, what is the smallest, most self-contained type of composting system that one could use? Would it be composting, let's say?
I've never done vermicomposting, but that you put that in your garage.
You can put it
Yeah,
in your kitchen.
well, if you have a garage, of course.
You can
Yeah,
put it in your
or
kitchen.
in a spare room. You can do it in the kitchen. I don't know if my wife would want worms in the kitchen, but it can be done. But the
Another
other thing is, particularly here in Monroeville, and I don't know about surrounding communities, they collect leaves in the fall. They all go to the Public Works Department and they're composted there.
I'm thinking
And
mainly of food waste, because you're not going to have leaves if you live in an apartment or a small,
Right,
small
right.
place.
But they do compost it, and in the spring, they put a pile of that compost right at the entrance to Public Works. And
Guess
you
we
can just,
gotta move to Monroeville then, huh? No, I mean, we do stuff a little bit like that.
no,
Another
no,
question is,
nobody, no one would question. You just show up with a 5-gallon bucket and
Oh, okay.
shovel some into your car, into your bucket, and take it home. And it's probably, if you're in an apartment, this is probably as much as you're going to need for one season.
Do you know Fred Craybill?
I do
Anyway.
not know.
You should, but
I do.
anyway, I wanted to put some compost over in their recycling system, and I was told that not to put any onion skins in there. Does that make any sense?
No.
Yeah, we do it all the
I
time.
got that wrong.
Don't know
I
why.
don't-
Norway maple is well known for inhibiting, anything around it. Should you steer clear of Norway maple?
Norway maple does that because it leaves out so early in the spring, and it holds on to its leaves long into the fall.
Oh,
and it
okay.
Feeds madly, so it's just hyper competitive. I don't believe it's allelopathic.
Okay. The last question I have is, what the heck what is the best system for dealing with dog poop? And I could ask some other questions about what to do with pet stuff, but like, anybody have any suggestions for the best way to deal with it?
If you want to compost it, you can Google composting systems for animal waste.
Okay.
They're there. There's they basically put it in a bucket. Years ago, I looked into it. Put it in a bucket that's buried in the ground with a lid on it.
Oh, I've seen stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do it
and,
in- Yeah. Go ahead.
has someone done that?
Well, on the theory that animals are pooping in the woods all the time, I have places where I'm doing sort of rougher composting that isn't my food scrap. My food scraps are going into my earth machine things because I want to keep out vermin that might spread disease.
Annie. Oh, I'm sorry.
ahead.
Could you put me in the buildings group?
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
But
thanks.
if you have space where you have a place that isn't uphill from a stream and you have a lot of garden waste, I put it in with garden waste and like cardboard that can't be recycled because there's food stuff on it and it's bigger than I want to tear into little bits for my food compost. And so basically larger scale organic material I put there, but I am careful that it's not
Oh, okay.
near a stream or something, and I'm not going to use that for food growing.
So we're just about to do breakout groups. Does anyone who has not spoken have any last comments or questions for Gerry?
I do. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Gerry, but also because Gerry Maynard, who is very active in Rotary, is here. And I also want to encourage people that are thinking of leaving to stay and just take at least a few minutes in the breakout group. And then you can cut out if you want to, but because Gerry Maynard is here, and also the name of the gentleman who just spoke is that I'm not remembering.
Ed?
Ed is
Ed?
here, and he's associated with AGH. I'm wondering if it would be plausible for the two of you to go talk to the administration at AGH and try to get some sort of composting going on that giant green grass property, where perhaps the community members could come and or the landscaping companies could dump their greens and their browns, and there could be a real food forest eventually going.
You mean
there.
Forbes, Elisa?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've tried to make inroads with Forbes. I tell you, what I would want to do is say, what do you got all this grass for? Let's have some healing gardens and, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, point well taken. And I got
My wheels are
tonight.
spinning here because of there's Rotary represented and also you over at AGH. Yeah. Anyway,
not
that's
AGH.
just what I wanted to.
AGH
not-
is over on the north side.
Oh, Forbes. Isn't that the AGH system?
It's called AHN, Allegheny Health Network.
Oh, AHN. Okay, sorry.
That's our part of the same system.
And thank you, everybody.
AGH is part.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for your presentation, Gerry, and everyone for your interesting discussion. I know Maren was answering like my questions in the comments. That was very helpful. So thank you. Thanks for everyone.
I'm supposed to
Thank
do
you for
something
having
in Rotary one of these days in Monroeville.
Okay, so I have everyone based on your registration going out to breakout groups. So I'm going to send everyone out right now. Oh, and these are just to further along our project. So if you enter and there's a new face, maybe say your name while you're here. Also, it's Josh's birthday today. So happy birthday, Josh.
Happy birthday.